Yes, guys, welcome back to another episode of Lily White Lounge. Just the two of us today, Travis, little duo. Usually we've got Ollie or maybe Sam here, but just two of us today. So, how you doing? How's your week been?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm all right, Kish. How are you? It's been a good week. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. Just started a new job, so we're doing that, but we're obviously staying consistent with this too. So let's get into
Coach's voice finest.
yeah, new employee of Coach's Voice, but mainly Lily White Lab, of course. Um, anyway,
Always, forever and always.
let's get into the Everton game, which was a tough watch. A typical Goodison Park game, I think. Um, Atmosphere, very stop-start-ish, set pieces, all that kind of thing, which I think never really allowed us to get in our rhythm. Some of that I think was our own doing as well. I think there was a real lack of patience and composure. Um, Their press was very aggressive, but we struggled to sort of play out of that smartly and cleverly. Um, and I think, at times forced the forward pass and struggled with the kind of intensity of the game, I thought. What were your kind of general thoughts on the Everton game?
Yeah, I agree with you in general. Really, followed a bit of a common pattern from our previous games. I'd say it just so happened that this time we did concede late on and we did slip up, which has been the case in other games as well. But it did very much remind me of what's been happening in our previous games this season. I mean, Brentford as well. I know we eventually ground out Brentford, but I'd say the actual trend of the game was quite similar. We maybe didn't create as much against Everton as we did against Brentford, but it was quite similar for the majority of the game. It was just that in Brentford, I'd say we had a 20-minute period where we were really, really dominant and really playing some really nice football. Against Everton, I'd say the goals came out of not nothing, but they weren't in keeping with the flow of the game, which was sort of how the game was. So, yeah, it was, as you said, it was a typical Goodison Park game. It was a tough game. It's a tough place to go. Um, but yeah, it was disappointing, I'd say, in the way we lost it more than anything, of course,
Yeah, I think we
or
actually
drew. Felt like.
defended pretty well for the 90 minutes. It was obviously set pieces where we were struggling, and sort of the fact that we didn't kind of control the tempo of the game. I thought both centre backs were very strong. I think the fullbacks both look like they need a little bit of a rest. To me, I think some of the
Yeah.
kind of losses of possession. Of course, they're both great players. Um, I think Porro's stopped sort of dominating games the way he was from right back, and the doggy is having a couple lapses
Yeah.
where he's still obviously shining at times. Um, but I thought the centre
Mhm.
backs were both very strong, especially Van der Ven. I think one thing I'm starting to notice is that Van der Ven gets a lot of plaudits because of the way he complements Romero. So I think a lot of Van der Ven stuff goes more noticed because there's a long run. Everyone can see that kind
Yeah.
of that action, whereas Romero is much more in the thick of things. Probably
Yeah.
a quick interception or a strong challenge, and then a second ball, and those things go more unnoticed. So I think that's part of the reason he's getting a lot more plaudits. But I do think he was excellent um, against Everton. Um, but yeah, I think my main
Just
concern is our lack of control at the moment. We're not controlling games. We're not dominating games. We're not sustaining attacks in the other half. Um, and I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on why you think that is. What is the issue with our with our controlling of games? And is there issues within the midfield that are sort of playing into that?
Yeah, just quickly before I get onto that, I want to touch on Van de Ven quickly. So I think that is a good point you make. It's a bit like what Maldini quote was like, if I make a tackle, I've already made a mistake. And that's not saying that Van de Ven has made a mistake, which is why he's tracking back, but a lot of his big standout moments are him covering space in behind and tracking a channel run from the striker and beating them to it, which is obviously a lot more eye catching and a lot more susceptible to be spread around with clips, for example, of him outpacing an attacker than him necessarily heading a ball clear or something like that. Which, again, neither is better than the other, but it just sort of goes to show what his strengths are and why he's being noticed so much.
Yeah, 100.
Um,
I was just going to
as
quickly also say, I think
Mhm.
his on the ball qualities have actually, I think, since the injury gone up. I don't know what that's about, whether that's confidence, whether that's. I think the way he's playing passes now are much more crisp and adventurous. I feel like. I don't know if the stats back that up, but the way it looks to me is that he's kind of his pass appreciation's gone up. So a lot of his passes are in his teammates' stride, a lot more pace on them, kind of fizzed in so that they can take it on the run. And I think that's definitely something I've noticed since he's come back. I think he's been pretty flawless since he's been back, to be honest.
Yeah, 100%. I completely agree. Um, yeah, I couldn't agree more. On the midfield cohesion and sort of struggling to control games, I think that comes back to the midfield cohesion a bit. So I think the main issue is the. Sorry, I was trying to think of something else. Um, the main issue with struggling to control games, I think, is about the profiles we have, mainly in attack. Um, and it's the issue with the wingers, I'd say. It's because the wingers we have, they're not masters of ball retention, for instance, right? So they all struggle to beat their man, control the game, calm the pace down. So when we get the ball in the final third, they want to go in transition. They want to constantly get in behind the space in behind, attack their winger, attack their fullback, sorry, and basically just move the ball as quickly as possible and get forward as quickly as possible. And when we get to the ball in the final third, sometimes we need to slow things down and we need to maintain possession. And I think that's where the issue with control comes in, is that when we're pinned back against a deep block, for example, if we're just constantly going at the defence, the ball gets turned over far too easily. So Werner and Johnson are prime examples of this. We need someone to slow the game down, to maybe recycle possession in certain instances, and not even that, but just to have the passing accuracy, the refinement on the ball that someone like Madison does, for instance, where we can keep things ticking over and just slowly sort of probe at the defence whilst we want to create chances. And I think that's the big issue that we have. You'll touch on this more because you've spoken about this a lot on our Twitter.
Yeah, I think our forwards are all in behind sort of players. None of them love kind of getting the ball to feet, retaining possession, um, sort of enjoying that that comfort on the ball. They're all kind of quite frantic. Um, and so what that means is that once we get into the final third, yeah, there's a lot. It's very frantic. There's a lot of turnovers. Um, Sometimes we can explode in behind, but sometimes it just turns over. And I think when your kind of most technical players are all kind of deeper, it also means that it's harder to sustain attacks because if you've got your players who are able to keep possession and kind of retain the ball and are comfortable kind of like slowing the pace down, kind of having the ball at their feet, basically. If that's not in your front line, then you're not going to sustain the ball in those areas because every time it enters that final third, it's either a straight attack or it's a turnover, and so that also I think is affecting our ability to counter press and win the ball high up because by the time it gets to the final third, it's either turned over straight away before we can even get up the pitch, or the attack's done and we've had a shot or whatever. There's never a time where we're kind of probing in that final third. And so the team can get up the pitch. And as soon as we lose it, we win it back. And then the game switches and the dominance comes from us playing in the opposition's half. It's not a complicated kind of tactic or anything. It's literally getting up the pitch and having more players in their third. And that's where I think the lack of dominance is coming.
Yeah, I think the counter pressing point's a really good one because that's something, and obviously that's a big part of the way we play is the counter pressing and trying to sustain pressure on the opponents. But if your structure is out of place and you're constantly in transition, you can't counter press because a lot of the time you want to retain possession and get into a position where your rest defense can form. And basically, a rest defense is just the structure you have whilst you're in possession. So it would be, say, the wingers are on the ball, it would be the three midfielders behind them or two defenders behind them in the set structure. It's basically your defense whilst you're in possession. And you need time to get into that structure, the same way a defense needs time to form their structure when they're out of possession. You can't form that structure in transition. So you need someone who can secure the ball whilst the other players move into position. And that's something that the front three don't have because when we need them to slowly retain possession and slow things down and not go for goal straight away, so that our defenders can get into position and our midfielders can be in position to cover them if the ball does get turned over. If they're constantly trying to attack as soon as possible and they don't have the retention to retain the ball and it gets turned over, our players then aren't in position to counter press. And we will still try to counter press, which is the issue there, because we're being encouraged to do so. But you can't counter press effectively unless you're in the position to counter press because there's too many gaps. And
Yeah.
I think that's costing us.
No, I think you're spot on there. And if I can just like sort of make that clearer for people that might have not understood that, it's like to be able to get into your rest defense shape, you need that small gap of time to get into that shape. So rest defense is obviously your shape, what your defensive shape while you have the ball. So to give, for example, Porro and Udogie to get into their kind of inverted fullback, but advance in the opposition's half, just in case the ball turns over so they can win that second ball, to give them that chance to do that, there needs to be a little bit of time to give them the opportunity to go and get in that position. If the ball gets turned over as soon as we touch the final third, Porro and Udogie are probably on their way to that position, but one of them might be kind of slightly behind, one of them might be there. And then the shape becomes all disjointed and the press looks messy. It looks probably uncoached and it looks messy. And that's kind of a byproduct of not being able to hold the ball for a long enough amount of time so that everyone can get in their positions so that we can counter press if we lose the ball. So it's being turned over so quickly, we don't even have time to get into that shape. But my kind of solution to all this is that, okay, cool, our front three right now, I think Kulusevski is like exempt from this because I think he can offer that. Not I think to an elite level, but I think he's one who can. But if our front three is say Johnson, Werner, and Son, or whoever, then our ball players and our kind of technically secure players are in midfield. So why can't we tell them to retain possession better. I think they're way too vertical, and I get it because our front three is so direct and so good in behind that we want to play them through all the time. But in games like this where it gets tight and we're under pressure, they need to be able to take the game, take this thing out the game and retain possession in midfield and slow it down and then build our attacks because it's so frantic right now that we're making games that shouldn't be an even playing field. We're making them an even playing field against Everton and Brentford, and we should be dominating those games. But if we just use our technical quality and technical superiority against these teams, then the kind of stronger side will kind of come out on top, and that's us. Um, that's quite a complex
Yeah, I
question, I guess. It's probably hard to sort of visualize all of that, but I think it's definitely a good point to discuss.
I can I completely agree, and I think that may be the way going forwards as to how to solve this issue whilst we don't have the profiles, is that we maybe need to retain possession more and use the ball more in midfield and defensive areas rather than constantly trying to go forward. Because the key thing with Ange is he wants to constantly attack and go forward and move the ball as quickly as possible. But when you don't have the profiles in the forward line to do that, to get to retain possession once you get to that point, then it's very difficult to get up in numbers and have the time to get up in numbers and sustain a set shape around the opposition box, for instance. So maybe what we need to do more is work with the profiles we have, the Poros, the Madison, the Doggy, Kulusevski, players with better ball retention who can who can attract pressure and evade pressure more securely. And because we can retain possession in those areas much better than we can in the forward line. But the problem is that we are trying to retain possession with our forward line when they don't necessarily have the skill set to do so, and we're moving the ball to them too quickly. So maybe we just need to slow things down. Madison, Bentancur, whoever else is playing in midfield can link up with each other and slow things down whilst the team gets into shape.
Yeah, and I almost think like yeah, at times ignore the front. I know it's frustrating because those front three can be so devastating, and we do have the players to pick them out. But it needs to be game management. So I find at 0-0 at the start of the game, I'm not against us always kind of spamming those through balls or trying to play like more direct. But if we're 1-0 down against Everton away from home, there's a time and a place to force those balls, and there's a time and a place to retain the ball and take this thing out of the game. And I think that's where the kind of experience of the side lacks. I also think we haven't seen enough of the underlaps, the kind of late arrivals from the likes of Sarr or Bentancur in the box, because again, they don't have time to get up the pitch because the ball gets turned over so quickly
Yeah,
by the front three. So, or maybe not turned over, but we get a shot off so quickly because that's their game. Their game is direct. Their game is frantic. Um, so it's never like, okay, let me take a second and let the underlap come or let Madison break into the box or Bentancur, whoever. I think Werner's probably the better one out of them at doing that at times. Like you see him kind of slow down
yeah,
sometimes, like in and around the box. But while they're not the perfect profiles, I think there's some coaching that can be done there into kind of slowing them down.
definitely.
Again, I think yeah, we're lacking that technical forward. I think we've gone on about it enough, and we'll sort of
Mm.
see
And
whether
it contributes to so many facets of play as well, not just creativity, but in terms of controlling the game, and it makes us more secure defensively as well. Because if we're able to retain the ball high and sustain pressure in their third, we're further away from our goal. So it's not just a creative thing.
and that's why we look so vulnerable right now. I feel like because we're not able to sustain attacks and we're turning the ball over before our teams even got up the pitch, and so it's so kind of frantic and so end to end, and it's tough to watch. I think in those circumstances. And we have a question from Zay in the chat from earlier who said, Does the constant link to non 1v1 wingers concern you? Also, why do you think we are going for these Brennan slash Timo type wingers tactically? Um, yeah, I think the 1v1 wingers links are starting to come a bit more. I think Paul O'Keefe, who's sort of pretty reliable, had said that we had a list already for the summer for wingers, and the type of players I saw in there were sort of the perfect profiles. I think Neto and Rafinha were said to be on there. I'd imagine the obvious like Nico Williams and stuff would be on the list as well. So I'm still confident that that profile will come in the summer. I think right now we're in a transitional phase, and I think Ange is looking at the profiles of the squad and thinking the best way of getting results right now is in a more transitional style. Um, Similarly to kind of not to compare, but what United did in their first season under Ten Hag, where
Mhm.
didn't seem to push on, but that was sort of his plan. But I think Ange has said so much, and I think it's still very different styles because we're still
Yeah.
looking to be aggressive and play on the front foot. But I think, yeah, I think he's opting for that more so currently because we're in that foundation phase of our kind of cycle with Ange. But yeah, I just wanted to quickly
Yeah, definitely.
touch on.
I also
Go on.
quick. Sorry, one more thing on that subject. Um, he mentions there, why do you think we're going for these Brennan and Timo type wingers tactically? And what I think is a key point there is it might not be so much about tactical and technical preferences right now. I think what Ange is trying to build in this squad, especially considering the last few years that we've been through, is actually more to do with athleticism, mentality, physicality. We've got a video coming out on it soon. It's more about what his players can give him in the intangibles and the things that maybe necessarily can't be coached as easily. You can't coach physical attributes. You can't coach mental attributes or as easily as technical attributes, I'd
I
say.
guess you can't coach personality. You can't coach mentality really. You can coach
Exactly.
mental kind of movements and habits, but you can't coach really like
Hmm.
personality. I think you're right. He's creating a core where yeah, physicality and mentality wins overall kind of thing. And I think it's a good foundation to build on. While it might not be pretty currently, I don't think it has been pretty in the last month. I think there's also context there. It's been injuries, and I'm still
Hmm.
very hopeful that the team and the system keeps developing. I want to quickly touch on the Vicario stuff. I don't think this needs to be gone into too much because I think a lot of people have touched on it. But for me, um, a lot of those were fouls on him in that game. But I also get that the league are being more lenient this season, so we have to take that and run with that. And for me, I was so disappointed that we weren't seeing players getting around him and 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 attacking the ball from standing next to him. And I think at every level of football, you have to protect your goalkeeper in those situations. If they're putting the ball on his head on him, you need to be next to him and make sure that no one can touch him, and then he can come and collect it because he's got more of a free run. Whereas if he's being pushed and in physical contact in and around his own 6 yard box, he can't get the momentum to come and claim it across. Whereas if you've got, I don't know, Romero, Van der Ven, someone pushing that player away, Van der Ven's got, I mean, Vicario's got more space to come and collect it. I don't think it's not really a complex issue, and I think we'll see that fixed pretty swiftly. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I think
definitely. I I saw a graphic posted by someone. I think it's John Harrison is the name. It's on screen now. It's basically just all of the crosses that Vicario has claimed or punched away or something like that. He's out of the 26 he's saved, or out of the 26 he's gone for, 23 of them have actually prevented a goal. Or so the expected goal of the ball in has been decreased
by
with
his
him
touch.
saving it,
Yeah.
right? 23 of them. have actually prevented more goals, and three of them have increased the likelihood of the opposition team scoring. So the majority of the ones he's coming for are decreasing the chance of the opposition scoring. He is still doing this very effectively. He is claiming crosses effectively, and as you can see on the graphic, it's a brilliant graphic. A lot of those crosses are coming straight into his 6 yard box and straight at him when he's often crowded around. And I think the only possible criticism is that he could be a bit less passive with it at times and maybe not allow himself to be dominated. But it's so difficult to do that when you're so crowded. And I think he does a great job at it most of the time. And as you said, I think this will get fixed in the coming weeks, and we'll see a solution to it, whether that be Vicario being more proactive or teammates surrounding him and blocking off the runners.
Yeah. And I think that that game, I do think the second goal he should have been more confident off his line. I think he was too deep in his 6 yard box and that equalizer. And I think that's probably a byproduct of all the kind of stressful game he went through. And he probably retreated to his line and stopped kind of coming and flapping at things. So yeah, I think it's probably a slight weakness of his because he's probably on the smaller side of keepers in terms of build, but it's nowhere near a problem. And I don't think we'll see much more out of that. This one's obviously going to be it's going to be a slightly shorter episode today, so we'll quickly touch on Brighton and then we'll get any questions. So Travis,
Should we quickly do something small on why we're conceding a bit late?
yeah, let's
I just think we should just a quick sum up of,
yeah, go on.
because I saw that, so we've conceded at this point in the season, we've conceded 8 goals in 90 plus minutes. I think the most in an entirety of a season from any Premier League team ever is 11, right? And I think it does come. We have already touched on it to a point. It comes back to us not being able to control games, and I think there's an element of our play that we're constantly trying to move the ball forward and be as direct as possible, and that when we do need to slow things down and control things, we're sort of caught in two minds because we can't necessarily play out the back and draw the press without being direct. And I know, and once we get the ball to the final third, for instance, as we've said before, we don't have the profiles to slow things down and wait for everyone to get in position. So controlling the game towards the end of the game, the best way to do that is to get into the final third and sustain pressure there, and to sort of set up your block in front of the opposition box so that you're as far away from your goal as possible. And we don't necessarily have the profiles to do that, as we've touched on earlier on in the podcast. But I think that plays into why we're actually conceding late on, rather than the defensive issues that people are pointing to and thinking it's an issue with our defense that they can't hold out for long enough. I think it's more about us not being able to control the games throughout the 90 minutes and constantly turning over possession too easily, that's allowing too much pressure on us at once in like several spells. I think that's the issue more than, say, switching to a five at the back and Dragusin coming in and changing structure. I think it's more just about the fact that we can't control possession.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree, and I think the longer the game goes on, the more we're sort of caught in two minds whether to keep being aggressive and direct, and then even a defensive substitution like that probably gets in the player's head of kind of how to deal with the game. I think this all comes with experience with this side together and knowing how to get over the line in these kind of games. I think Madison's someone who will massively help here because he's got personality. He won't hide. Um, he'll take the ball in pressured moments. And he's got that smarts about him in kind of game management. I feel like even the small things like buying free kicks, all those kind of percentages that really help. And I think right now we're quite naive in those scenarios, but but yeah, I think we're still growing as a side, so those things will come. In terms of Brighton, we've got a thread coming out on in terms of previewing it, so we'll probably not really properly preview it today. But in terms of a matchup, and I know we got absolutely slapped last time we played them, but in terms of a tactical matchup, I kind of fancy us in this game. I think Brighton leaves space and behind. We've got the right profiles for that. Charlison's on form. It's at home. Players are back. I think this will be quite a straightforward game in my eyes, and I think one that is overdue in terms of a dominant performance. And so, yeah, I think we'll be fine. What are your thoughts on Brighton?
I completely agree with you. I think that whilst they're they are a very impressive side and they know their patterns to play very well, they're very good out of possession and in all facets of play, as you said, they leave a lot of space in behind that suits us well at the moment in transition with the likes of Werner, Johnson, Richarlison. We won't necessarily this won't be a game where we have the main share of the ball. And I think that's absolutely fine because as we've said over and over, that suits our profile of player because we can't really control the game. So it suits us better to move the ball in transition quickly. I also think in terms of out of possession, this will also suit us quite well. Brighton are an elite build-up side. They're fantastic. And their ability to use third man runs and understand where every other player on the field is at the right time and know the next pass before they even receive the ball is incredible. And that can play around with the press a lot. However, I think our press is very strong. I think not just structurally, but mentally, in terms of Richarlison's a very good presser, Werner's a very good presser, Johnson's definitely working on that. And I think that they are susceptible to a mistake. They showed that against Luton last week. They made a mistake. They're a bit weak in midfield. I think the likes of Gilmore, Pascal Gross, they're brilliant players, Gross in particular. But if we put Sarr in midfield, if we've got Bissouma possibly featuring for um, a brief period in the game, I think we could outmatch them physically, and we could outrun them. And I think that will be the way that we might overcome them in this game, rather than um, controlling the possession essentially.
Yeah, and to add on top of that, I think the concerns we had earlier around kind of we're not being able to sustain pressure in the opposition half, and we're not able to get into our kind of pressing shape in time because the ball is being turned over so quickly. I think Brighton will allow us to get in our pressing shape because they love to draw the press. So their centre backs will dwell on the ball and literally invite the press and literally giving us the time to get in that kind of that
Yeah, exactly.
pressing shape, and that will play into our hands. And I think the Zerbi's not one to kind of adapt to opposition like that. So he'll play his way, and I think that will play into our hands. We probably have time for a couple questions before we wrap up. We're going to have obviously a Brighton preview thread out tomorrow on Twitter, so keep an eye out for that. But yeah, if we've got any questions, Andrew, just pop them through. Probably have time for one
Yeah.
or two.
No questions. But I do. I personally have one question.
Oh.
Basuma's back. I'm just curious how he's going to fit in the game on Saturday. If he's playing, if he's not playing, and if he is, with who?
In my eyes, I think we've missed Basuma. I know he was pretty up and down, well, pretty down before he went. Um, but I think Bentancur struggled recently. I think Højbjerg has struggled recently with more minutes. Um, and I really want Basuma to kind of find that early season form. And now he's got a run of games. Hopefully, no more suspensions, no AFCON, obviously. I think if he gets in his rhythm, he can be kind of vital for us. As I don't think he's an elite six or doesn't suit his game properly. I think his press resistance and I think one thing I've struggled with Bentancur being as the number 6 is he's very direct with his passing. He's very vertical with his passing,
Mm.
which again has led to these multiple turnovers. And of course, it works at times. Um, but with Bissouma, he's more of a carrier. He doesn't lose the ball as much as he's not as expansive with his passing, but what he will do is keep it ticking more, I think, and help us build a bit more. Um, and I think in times where we've kind of struggled to control games, sometimes I just want someone to just slow the game down, um, and just pop 5 yard passes around the back four and let us kind of build. And I think Basuma will help in that aspect. Travis, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I was going to say that I think it would be um, that press resistance that will really help us in terms of just being able to buy a foul as well. And I think that and actually being able to buy a foul and take a marker out of the game, because something we have struggled with is sort of moving out of when against Brentford especially when we were playing out of the back. There were time and time and again we just got caught out and we kept making mistakes. The doggy led to the goal, obviously, and sometimes when you can't find that extra pass and there's not a free man, you need someone individually to break the press for you. And I think that's something Basuma does really well, and that he can receive the ball, turn his man, and then he's the free man to carry the ball forwards. And say he turns his presser, that means that someone else on the opposition team needs to cover and run towards him. And then when that person runs towards him, they've left their marker, for instance, and then he can find the pass that opens up space. And his ability to do that is really invaluable in build up and something we don't really have elsewhere in the team, apart from maybe Madison. But so far, when he's come back, I actually think he's looked a bit off in that, and he's not quite looked. It's probably just to do with he's coming back from injury. He's not quite looked as sharp and been able to quickly receive the ball and skin his marker. Um, but I'm sure that will come back in time. But that trait is really invaluable.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. So once Basuma gets up to speed, I think it will take a bit of time, but yeah, I think we've missed that, and it will need to come from him because I don't think he was doing enough of that before AFCON. Um, but yeah, I think that he has the qualities to definitely do that, and hopefully we see that. If that's no more questions, then I think we'll wrap up there. Obviously, guys, we've got a YouTube video dropping tomorrow along with the Brighton thread. The YouTube videos kind of what Ange looks for in his signings or what he's currently looking for in the players he's bringing in and in terms of squad building. So keep an eye out for that. Obviously, make sure you subscribe to us because we're going to add to the videos we've got so far, and we're trying to stay very consistent. But yeah, hopefully that Brighton game's as kind of positive as we expected it to be. And
Yeah.
we'll have another one of these next week, along with consistent videos. So thanks for tuning in, everyone. Thanks, Travis. Thanks, Andrew. And come on, you Spurs.
Thanks, Kish.